Hey there, Alex Kidman here. Today taking a look at this, the Motorola G04. It's another budget phone from Motorola, and I for one am shocked. Okay, maybe I'm not that shocked, because while Motorola does do some decent mid-range and higher-end phones these days, here in Australia, it's best known for its affordable phone lines, and the G04 certainly is affordable. With an official list price of $179, there is a $149 Telstra variant coming. I haven't tested that one out, and I'll get into that shortly. But the end story here is this is a super cheap phone. Anything under $200 is basically a very cheap phone these days, and often very cheap phones are pretty bad phones. The G04 isn't a bad phone. It's not super fast. It has some very specific limitations, especially around the camera. But for its asking price, I actually think it's fairly decent value compared to what else you can get right now at this price. Let's get into it. So in design terms, the G04 is built around a 6.6-inch 720p capable IPS LCD with 90Hz refresh rates. And look, that's not bad for the money. It's kind of average for the money. It is pleasing to see 90Hz here, although that's not quite as good as you might think it is, depending on what you want those faster refresh rates for. Again, I'll get into that fairly directly. Now, this is a plastic body phone, no great surprises there, that sells in Australia in Concord Black, Satin Blue, or Sunrise Orange finishes. It's the latter that I've got here. Certainly very bright, nice and eye-catching if you like that kind of style. It appears there's also a sea green model that you can get in some international markets, but not here. Now, usually I'd bemoan that. Honestly, at this price point, I'm kind of impressed that we're getting more than one colour at all. Bit of variety is nice to see, frankly. You also get a simple, clear, protective case in the box with the Motorola G04. And that's a really great step, because even low-cost phones deserve protection, especially as, while Motorola claims this is water repellent, that basically just means we didn't leave any big gaping holes in it. There's no IP-rated water resistance here, not that you'd really expect it in a sub-$200 phone. All of the G04's controls sit on the right-hand side with a volume rocker sitting above a combination power button and fingerprint reader. It's the usual kind of thin type thing. Often I find those are a little trickier to hit just because there's less of a strike zone. I haven't had too many problems with the G04 in my testing in this regard, although it's not super quick to open. That's more a function of what the phone is, though, I suspect, than the quality of the fingerprint reader. At the top, you'll find a 3.5mm headphone jack, and then on the left-hand side, you'll find the SIM card tray. Now, one nice feature here, at least on the model that Motorola has sent me, is that it's dual nano SIM plus microSD, so you get a long, thin, triple card tray. Don't see that too often these days. Nice to see here. The one caveat I'll put here, now I haven't tested this, I don't know because it's not yet on sale, but Telstra is going to be selling a version of this phone at $149, a bit cheaper than Motorola itself. And that model, almost certainly, if history is any guide, will probably drop that extra SIM card slot. Telco models almost always a single SIM because they don't really want you thinking about other networks. To be fair, Optus and Vodafone do this too, so this isn't just a Telstra thing. But if that multi-SIM and microSD thing is important to you and you're looking at the Telstra version in Australia, I definitely check the specs, check what they say before you buy. As I say, not on sale here at the time I'm recording this review, so I don't know for sure, but I've got a hunch that that's going to be the story, and that's going to be why it's a little bit cheaper if you get it through Telstra. On the camera front, flip the Moto G04 around and you could be mistaken for thinking that you're getting a dual lens array, but you're not. There's one single 16 megapixel wide lens with a flash sitting beneath it, and then at the front, just a 5 megapixel selfie camera. Very, very ordinary, very rudimentary specifications here, which leads, to nobody's surprise, to very, very ordinary photos. Not actively bad, but not great at all. And look, that's just across the board. 16 megapixels doesn't give it a whole lot of scope for example, digital zooming. I'll give you an example here. So here's a local fountain just as a standard wide shot. It's okay, although you can already see that owing to the bad weather and slightly lower light, it's struggling a bit with a few elements here. If I take it up to 2x zoom, again, just a digital crop, Yeah, there's a few problems starting to creep in here, and at 4x and 4x is its maximum, yeah, there's all sorts of problems with that shot. I'm kind of thankful they don't take it beyond 4x, but fundamentally, digital zoom on this phone, not great. Equally, low light performance on this phone, not great. Selfies in portrait mode, well, I mean, it can do them, I suppose, but look, I look like I've been photoshopped into this particular selfie. It looks like I'm not actually there. It's quite artificial. Now, to be fair to the Geo 4, I've tested a lot of sub $200 phones, which have taken photos way worse than this does. But still, you're going to hit the limitations of this phone's camera capabilities very quickly. But then again, these days, everyone has a camera in their pocket. This is a deeply average one, even at its price point. It's one of my least favourite things about the Motorola Geo 4, frankly. On the hardware and performance front, the Geo 4 is built around a Unisoc T606, which is very much the budget phone maker's processor of choice these days, paired up with 4GB of RAM and 64GB of storage. Now, 64GB of storage, and obviously Android's going to take its chunk, pre-installed apps are going to take their chunk. That's not a heck of a lot. I'm quite grateful this will take microSD card expansion. 4GB of RAM, though, is actually kind of pleasing to see. I quite often at this price bracket see 2 or 3GB of RAM paired up with things like Android Go. That's not the story for this phone. Still, the T606 is not fast. I've benchmarked it extensively. There's a link to my full text review where the benchmarks will appear a little bit better in the description below, so go and check that out. But the fundamental thing here is this is not a particularly fast phone in CPU or GPU terms. Now, what that means in terms of everyday performance is, yeah, it's kind of ordinary. It can be a little bit slow. I was surprised to note some higher-end games would actually install. For a lot of these lower-end phones, it just goes, no, this isn't compatible with your phone. But, for example, here I've got Diablo Immortal running, well, sort of running. It's not particularly high spec, and here that 90Hz refresh rate kicks in. And when I say kicks in, I actually mean it gets kicked, because the game itself says, no, look, your phone's just not up to running at a high frame rate, even if the screen can handle it. 90Hz is still nice for things like web page scrolling, but for gaming, I think you've got to be realistic here about what you can actually do on a phone at this price point. And if you stick to much more basic games, I love me some pinball, for example, then you'll do fine. Higher end games, yeah, it's going to struggle because of course it is. The Motorola Geo 4 is an Android phone. Of course, it's Android 14, and disappointingly, that's all it will ever be. Motorola is not committing to any Android OS upgrades officially for this phone. It will supply, however, 2 years of security updates, which is sort of nice to see, and I guess it's a glass half full kind of story. On the one hand, it's nice to see Motorola being upfront, because for a lot of these cheap phones, manufacturers just will stay mum. They won't say anything about how many upgrades it's getting, because usually that means none. Equally though, it's kind of disappointing with a new phone to see no upgrades at all. Thankfully, Motorola's own launcher is fairly lightweight, which generally I prefer. I prefer stock Android. Your own opinions may vary. You only get the one Moto action with the Geo 4. That's the double chop to launch the flashlight, which works reasonably well enough. Overall, look, this in performance terms is pretty much what you'd expect for a budget phone. Can you get faster phones? Of course you can. Generally, you will pay a little bit more if you're talking about new phones. There's obviously a challenge in this space towards older phones that drop in price closer to this. It's always worth shopping around. But this does kind of what I expected it to do at this price point, and not a whole lot more. On the battery front, it's packing a 5,000 mAh battery because it seems to be the law these days that unless you're a folding phone and you're in the Android space, you've got a 5,000 mAh battery. But as your favourite smutty joke would say, it's not the size that counts, it's what you do with it. And the T606 is not a fast processor, which gives this some scope for better battery life. It doesn't 100% get there, but it's still pretty decent. So, for example, my own standard YouTube 1 hour battery test saw it lose only 7% of battery life. That's pretty decent. Points to a phone that, under most circumstances, you should be able to get a day's usage out of, maybe even 2 if you're a very casual kind of user. My own experimentation showed that, yes, I could send it flat within a day. I can do that to any phone. But most days it was fine to last through the day of average usage. Recharging the Geo 4 is not particularly fast, Wired only, of course, at this price point, 15 watts maximum. Here in Australia, the Geo4 does not come with a charger, just a cable, although I get the feeling in some international markets it may come with a charger, but you'll have to supply your own down under. So should you buy the Motorola Geo4? Well, look, assessing phones in this price bracket is all about balance. It's all about what are you getting as a compromise for this price point, but equally, what are you getting that makes this phone stand out at this lower price point? And this is a balance I think the Moto Geo4 manages fairly well. The performance for the price is decent. I like the style of the phone. The screen is nice, 90Hz is nice to see. The camera, though, is not particularly good. It's not a super powerful phone, especially for things like gaming, and the charging is not particularly fast either. However, if you're working on the kind of budget where this is all you can spend on a phone, you're getting decent value here. Maybe not a supremely exciting phone, but a solid little workhorse for sure. Anyway, that's my take on the Motorola Moto Geo4. What do you think? Anything you'd like to know? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.